2xKO is Riot's upcoming 2v2 tag fighter, and whether you're a big fighting game fan or a big League of Legends fan, the question is, who's going to be in the game? But as someone who's been playing League for over 10 years and is a big fighting game fan, I've been thinking less about who's going to be in 2xKO, and rather how those characters will be implemented into a fighting game. Riot doesn't have an easy road ahead of them when it comes to faithfully translating League characters from a MOBA to a fighting game, and I'm curious to see how they'll handle it. We've all seen our fair share of disappointing adaptations lately, and those studios didn't even have to worry about things like competitive integrity.
I like playing him, but yeah, he's fucking bullshit.
So anyways, I thought it would be a lot of fun to take a look at some of the League of Legends cast and see if we can think of some fun ways to port them into 2xKO. And don't worry, while I won't go in depth about absolutely everything, I'll make sure to touch on fighting game jargon and League lore when it's relevant, so there's no prerequisite to enjoying this video. Before we start, let's talk expectations. Here are my goals for this video. Now that you've seen them, feel free to skip ahead if you'd like, but I'm going to briefly lay out my thought process surrounding these aspects for those who are interested.
Here we go. Oh, that was so loud.
First and foremost, I'm looking to emphasize cool ideas way more than practicality. Riot has the money and therefore the room to make some pretty bold choices with their game, and especially considering that it's a tag fighter, I think it's perfect for exploring pretty ridiculous gameplay mechanics. Besides, I'm not actually making the game, nor am I educated enough to actually talk about good game balance anyway. So, I'd much rather focus on the fun stuff. After all, frame data and damage numbers can always be tweaked, but a lame move is always going to be lame. My primary goal when thinking of movesets is to most accurately translate a League of Legends character from their kit, to their lore, and even their out-of-game reputation. And faithfully translate that to 2xKO. This will not involve making an entire fleshed out moveset with normals, specials, and supers, but will instead focus on their most iconic abilities or gameplay loops that I think would accurately represent that character. Also, I'm not going to bother trying to map out a roster size or a balanced spread of champion representation, since I think that's arbitrarily limiting creativity, and besides, eventually, 2xKO will have a billion characters in it anyway. Side note, one of Riot's goals with 2xKO is undoubtedly to get more people invested in and potentially playing League of Legends. It would be pretty disappointing if you mained a character in 2xKO, and when you went to check them out in League, you realized they're basically a completely different character. Or vice versa. I mean, our Kayn already sort of has this issue too. Which leads me to my third point, avoiding homogeneity. Like any game with a large roster, League has some overlap with its champion design philosophy. And this is a good thing, generally speaking. Archetypes and playstyles help us quickly identify what to expect when we pick a character. And the same is true for fighting games. But within those archetypes, I think it's a lot more interesting if characters have as much as possible that makes them unique. Whether it's purely for the flavor or the gameplay, having attachments to your character is something special, and we don't want anyone to feel disappointed that their character is kinda lame. With the exception of one or two basic characters for those of us who like that sort of thing. Now I know I said earlier that balance wasn't going to be a big focus, but ideas still have to have some feasibility to be exciting. If an idea is too out there, then even as a concept, it loses its charm quickly.
Lee Sin's hidden passive is blindness. Your entire screen is blurry while playing him at all times.
So, when it's relevant, I'll be mentioning interesting ways I think certain moves can be implemented into the game. Let's ease into things by starting with a character that will be easy to digest for both League fans and fighting game fans. I highly suggest those of you unfamiliar with fighting games and their mechanics to watch this section, as I'll be using it to cover a lot of the basics and terminology to help visualize the ideas to come. That also means it'll be a bit longer than the other sections, but bear with me. Sett is a might makes right street brawler turned underground pit fighter, who eventually overthrew the business for himself through force. He's a bit of a mama's boy, and he's also half a Styan, a race of animal people from the region of Ionia. He isn't afraid of any opponent and carries himself with a certain type of pride that comes from knowing he's the best there is. So, as you might imagine, Sett's kit is already pretty good for a fighting game. But there are still some interesting design choices to discuss. Let's take a look at his abilities and go over how to implement them into a fighting game, starting with the simplest ones first. Let's start with Sett's E and Ultimate, as they're fairly similar in concept. Starting with the latter, Sett's Ultimate is called the Showstopper. Sett dashes a short distance towards his target before picking them up and slamming them into the ground, with various animations being possible. Sett's E, Facebreaker, has him reaching out to a short area on either side of him and pulling in any enemies caught in the range. If there are targets on either side of him, he'll smash them together and stun them. I think a simple but fun idea for this would be to give Sett a series of combo enders that are grabs. An air grab for the Showstopper, and a grounded throw for his Facebreaker. The Showstopper could easily function similar to King's running Jaguar Bomb in Tekken, which is a move used at the end of combos to deal some additional damage before returning both players to a mostly neutral position. Combos in fighting games have to end at some point, and having a big flashy move to end it off can be hype, especially for someone like Sett, who probably had to do some crowd pleasing during his pit fighting days anyway. Plus, the Showstopper sends Sett and his opponent into the air anyway, so making it an air throw would already be halfway there. Additionally, like it is in League, Showstopper could have different animations that play out randomly every time you use the ability. This would be a great opportunity to add some hype and flavor to his kit without having to invent more moves just to fit them in. Facebreaker I think could function in the exact same way, but for combos that stay on the ground. My first thought was to stay true to the name and give him Heihachi's Chrome Dome, which I think would get the job done. But, more interestingly, I think we should expand on this idea and try to implement the defining feature of this ability. Recall that in the League iteration of this move, if there are enemies on either side of him, Sett will smash their heads together and stun them. But how do we hit both targets at the same time? Well, in 2x KO, like other tag fighters, you have an active character and an assist character. It may be a 2v2 fighting game, but all four characters rarely interact at the same time. The active character is the one on the field who is currently doing the fighting, and the assist character waits until they're tagged in to either swap in for the active character and change places with them, or to do an assist move, where they briefly step into the action and do something to help their partner, such as a quick attack to help extend a combo, or even to bail them out of a combo themselves. The key thing I want to bring to your attention here is that when assist characters come onto the screen, they aren't invincible. With the correct timing or read, a player can hit both the active character and assist character to get what's called a happy birthday.
Yeah, gets a happy birthday. Let's see if Havoc can bring this back.
It almost has 5 meters. This is actually terrifying. Oh my goodness. Happy birthday.
That's not gonna kill.
Now if you're still following me, we return to Sett's E, Facebreaker. Imagine now that Sett lands a happy birthday on his opponents and begins his combo. As he ends it, the animation on Facebreaker changes, smashing both opponents' heads together, dealing bonus damage. Admittedly, this is a really niche scenario and is mostly a flavor-driven choice. But I think one of the most important aspects of any game is instilling that sense of wonder that comes from a what-if factor. Something like a happy birthday is already such a rare and satisfying situation, so giving Sett a little something extra for that rare scenario is warranted, I think. Next is Sett's passive, Pit Grit. This ability grants Sett increased passive health regeneration, growing in potency as his health lowers. Functionally, this allows Sett to take aggressive fights with his opponents while minimizing losses so long as he has some time to heal up. It encourages the Sett player to fight often and not be afraid of taking damage. Healing in fighting games is usually pretty controversial, but I think this can actually be integrated into 2xKO in an interesting and functional way. Often in tag team fighters, you'll see that as players take damage, their health bar seems to have a few forms. A colored portion, your actual health, a black or empty portion, your missing health, and a faded, or in this case, red portion, your recoverable health. When a character tags out, they slowly begin to regenerate health, capping out at the end of the recoverable portion. This encourages you to swap out your active character if they get low, in order to keep them alive for later on in the round, especially since once a character is down, they can't impact the game anymore. In 2xKO, there's a mechanic known as Last Stand that allows a downed player to use an assist one last time, but even that's a one and done, so swapping out fighters is a smart idea. This back and forth is part of what goes into creating a strong team composition in tag fighters, which I won't go into detail about here, but the surface level of it is the fighter who begins the round as an active character is often referred to as the point, and they're typically good at fighting with low resources and pair nicely with assists. Conversely, the second fighter, the anchor, might have good resource usage, a strong assist to help the point fighter, or strong without the help of assists themselves. Circling back to Sett, let's see what would happen if we gave Sett increased health regeneration. This could really give Sett a strong reason to be a point character, as he wouldn't be afraid of taking some damage early on in the round to make use of his passive and come back for more later. We could potentially even go so far as to give him the increased scaling based on how low his health is, emphasizing Sett's resilience and showing off some of his lore through gameplay. Haymaker is Sett's W and his most iconic ability. Sett builds a rapidly decaying resource called Grit as he takes damage. When he casts Haymaker, he strikes a large area in front of him, dealing damage based on how much grit he had when casting. The center of the area does massively more damage, and the ability also grants him a shield, again scaling based on how much grit he had. All of these aspects together create for an ability which can single-handedly turn a lost fight into a win. The key thematic ties with this ability are as follows. It can turn a losing fight into a winning fight. It allows Sett to momentarily be more aggressive in exchange for having taken damage, and hitting Sett makes him stronger. If we were to port Haymaker into the game as is, it mainly runs into two issues. Firstly, a move like Haymaker needs to be a bit slower than average to both feel powerful and be balanced. However, in a fighting game, slow moves are usually a bad thing, as your moves get interrupted by any attacks you receive from the opponent. Second, a character's special move scaling based on how much damage they recently took would be really frustrating. You would be getting punished for playing the game well and hitting Sett with a big move or combo. So I think instead we can lean into these fantasies in a different way.
I am almighty!
Armor in fighting games varies a bit depending on the specific game, but in general, it's an attack with the added property of allowing your character to get hit during its startup animation, still taking damage, but able to complete the attack without getting interrupted. This simple addition to a special move gives it so much flavor in the context of Sett's Haymaker. By reading your opponent's offense, you can brute force your way out of a bad situation. It would also make the move less unfair, because unlike punishing a player for doing big damage, getting hit by an armored attack usually means that you're being too predictable with your offense. That takes care of one of the design philosophies. But how about these two? This last point I think could be very easily addressed by giving the move more damage if Sett soaks a hit with the armor during its startup, as opposed to a clean natural hit. But this middle point is a bit trickier. I have exactly two ideas that are both interesting and adhere to this identity. Starting off with the simpler option. This is an extension of the previous idea, where Sett would become more powerful depending on whether or not he took a hit with Haymaker's armor. Let's say that on a normal hit where the opponent does not hit Sett, it's just a normal punch that does moderate damage. Now, if Sett is hit during Haymaker's startup, we can give the move a knockdown property, which limits the opponent's options as they get up off the ground. This creates an advantage state where Sett would be able to close in and apply pressure to the opponent who has limited options to fight back. Option 2 is giving Sett the shield from League. The issue being that shields in fighting games aren't really a thing. At least as far as I know, and especially not in the way that they're done in League. However, I think that it can be done. I think when Sett uses his Haymaker, it could consume his recoverable health and grant him a shield based on how much was consumed. The shield would act identically to normal health, but decay or expire after a brief time. This use it or lose it period of extra protection would be a great time for Sett to make some riskier plays, wagering his safety in exchange for a bigger payout, with the added padding to soften the blow if things go south. However, the risk of losing all your recoverable health for nothing would be something that the Sett player would always have to consider, and something that a smart opponent might even be able to bait Sett into wasting. One last thing to add to this, I think if we modify Sett's passive to grant him the ability to regenerate actual health at a slower pace, he could have a very solid gameplay loop of starting out as the active character, taking a beating, and tagging out before coming back for more. That was a lot to take in, but now you're acquainted with some of the fundamental terminology regarding fighting game systems, and everything will be easier from here on out. As I mentioned earlier, I started us out with Sett because he was an easy to understand baseline champion. However, as you may have begun to notice, I'm a big fan of flavor when it comes to champion design. So instead of playing it safe and discussing the obvious run-of-the-mill fighters and weapon users, let's dive into something less conventional.
Fired up and ready to serve.
Blitzcrank is an older champion, and part of that age means that he doesn't have all that much relevant lore. He's a public service robot that started to think a little too hard and ran away. Yeah, not the most interesting backstory of all time, but what he does have going for him is one of the game's most iconic abilities, Rocket Grab. This ability sends out a fast projectile in a straight line, and the first target hit is pulled to his location. The ability is simple, straightforward, and very powerful, keeping opponents on their toes and potentially forcing them out of position for the smallest misstep. And I think it's even fair to say that all his other abilities exist purely to complement it. Worth noting is that while Rocket Grab's huge value is Blitzcrank's biggest strength, it's also his clearest weakness. He can command space just by threatening the possibility that he'll cast it, but at the same time, if he misses, 90% of his power budget is simply gone until the long cooldown is over, giving enemies the freedom to walk up and assert themselves back into a good position. Once again, here are the main design goals. If it wasn't clear enough already, this is going to be one of those design overbalanced parts of the video. Alright, for starters, let's address the problems. Firstly, there aren't many skill shots in fighting games, which makes it hard to give Rocket Grab some of the counterplay that's integral to its League design. For those unaware, a skill shot is an ability that is freely aimed in any direction by the player. Basically anything that doesn't lock on to a target. You could argue that attacks with selectable but not fully free aim count as skill shots as well, but just for the sake of this video, I won't be counting those. Secondly, its threat of being able to catch you out for being out of position doesn't hold the same gravitas in a fighting game with one player as it does in a MOBA with 5 players. Getting hit by a combo for not blocking is just how the game works, whereas watching your teammate wander off into the enemy team, delivering to them 1000 gold and 45 minutes worth of grueling gameplay is, well, still how the game works, but you know, less amenable. Anyway, all that is to say, I want to avoid doing the obvious thing, which is making a Rocket Grab a ranged attack that brings the opponent to you. It works, but it's pretty lame, and it doesn't have the impact that the ability deserves. I think that Blitzcrank should have some way to hook the assist character off the bench and forcibly swap them in as the point character. So here's a few different ways I think that could work. Okay, so originally I had a couple ideas for this section, but I'm going to take the time to focus on the weirdest idea that I have since it's the most fun to talk about. I think we can make Blitzcrank a character that specifically interacts with Super Meter as his core gameplay mechanic. Let's explore that topic. For the astute viewers, you might have noticed that during these mockups of gameplay, that there was another bar at the bottom of the screen separate from the health bar. This is what's colloquially referred to as the super meter. Again, exact specifics vary on the game, but at its core, super meter, or bar as you might hear some call it, builds up as you deal and receive damage. Once a bar is full, the number to the side increments by 1, and another bar begins to build. Usually the system is capped at a certain number, 3 in Street Fighter, 7 in Dragon Ball FighterZ for example. Once you have a certain number of bars filled, you can expend them to unleash a powerful, often cinematic move, typically called, you guessed it, supers. Supers are usually strong attacks that do a lot of damage, but can sometimes have other effects such as buffs or even utility. Most games have it structured so characters have multiple supers with different costs, typically 1, 2, or 3 bars. The higher the cost, the stronger the move. So where is this all heading? My concept is that Blitzcrank would have access to Rocket Grab as his one and only super move. I also think that he should have a higher cap and faster super generation rate than other characters to accentuate the threat of Rocket Grab. Well, how many bars would Rocket Grab cost then? Again, there's lots of angles we can take here, but in the interest of showing off the funniest idea I have, let's talk about the Injustice wager system. In Injustice, once per round, during a combo, players may initiate a wager. This briefly takes them out of combat, and both players secretly select how many bars of super they're willing to gamble, capped at the amount they had at the time of the wager, of course. Based on the difference of how many bars each player wagered, the winning side gets rewarded. If the player who was attacking at the time the wager began wins, they deal damage to the defender based on the difference of super meter wagered. Conversely, if the defender wins, they heal an amount instead. You might see where I'm going with this, but I think it could be really interesting to see Blitzcrank use Rocket Grab and wager a number of bars. Let's say that Blitzcrank has a cap of 7 for his super meter. When he inputs the command for Rocket Grab, there could be a way for him to wager a given number of bars, and then the enemy can answer back using both their meters combined. If Blitzcrank wagers more, he hooks in the support character, and if they either tie or Blitzcrank loses, then nothing happens. There's even potential here to make the move stronger depending on how much Blitzcrank wins the wager by. Imagine if Blitzcrank wagers 5 meters and the enemy wagers 0. Maybe Blitzcrank can apply a no swap debuff to the point character for X number of seconds. Assists would still be allowed, but no full-on swapping since you won by so many meters. There's definitely some challenges with this sort of design. Namely, I'm sure you'd have to figure out a way to do wagers that's different from Injustice because of how disruptive it is to the gameplay, as all of the pausing would get annoying really fast. On top of that, the balance of an ability like this is a nightmare. I do think it boasts a lot of positives as well though. This gameplay loop is very unique, and firmly solidifies Blitzcrank's disruption-based support playstyle. It also meshes very well with his League iteration, with a heavy focus on Rocket Grab, as well as some tie-ins to the Steam Golem robot fantasy. It would even maintain the mind games as well as the peaks and valleys. If Blitzcrank is positioning aggressively towards you in League, then you have to respect him and give away some of your space. Same as if he had 5 or 6 bars of super, for example. At the same time, the Blitzcrank player could choose not to do anything and simply pressure you to make a mistake. Or they can completely whiff their core ability and give you a lot of space to find your footing before his next power spike. Hello, it's me, God. If you're wondering why I've summoned you out of the video, for starters, thanks for watching this far. It's already been a pretty long video. That being said, I've been working on this video on and off for a few months now, and things have gotten to the point where if I make it any longer, champions that I'm writing about will be announced before the video is ever published. In fact, Braum was just released with a suspiciously similar shield mechanic as I have written in my notes. Jokes aside, 2 champion gameplay reveals and a minor UI update has already happened since the time I've started editing. On top of all that, when I started working on this video, I told myself I'd get it out by Evo, and I've decided to stick to that goal, despite not having everything I want in here. I think it's better for me to wrap things up and get this video out there than to let it collect dust. I know it was a little misleading to showcase only a grand total of 2 champion concepts, but I hope you can forgive me on that one. I'd like to think I'd given you some inspiration to fill in the gaps about your own favorite champion and the potential they have as a 2x KO fighter. All in all, thanks again for watching, and I'll leave you with a reading of some of my favorite ability concepts that didn't make it into the video. I won't be explaining the jargon that I'm using in this section, so refer to the fighting game glossary in the description if you get lost.
None can escape me.
Mordekaiser is a slow but hard-hitting juggernaut from League of Legends. His most iconic ability sends him and his opponent to the Death Realm, where they are forced into a 1v1 until someone dies or 7 seconds pass. Maybe in 2x KO, Mordekaiser could do the same, by disabling assists for both players and reducing the size of the stage temporarily. Other ways to achieve this idea could include having a super that disables assists for a few seconds, or maybe an ability that encapsulates the other player in a small cube like the Space Stone in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite.
Nico is best decision!
Nico is a Vastaya that has the ability to take on the form of other champions and even objects in League. Knowing this, I think it's only natural that the random character select is Nico, who has a special intro before transforming into the actual character, like Mokujin in Tekken. The main problem with this is that Nico fans wouldn't actually be able to play their favorite character, but I think that you could actually make Nico an entirely unique character and also have her be the random character, since the random Nico would just transform as soon as you were in-game anyway.
A demonstration of superior judgment.
Shen is a tank whose most important ability is called Stand United. This ability causes Shen to channel in place for 3 seconds, granting his target ally a shield and teleporting to them wherever they are. Knowing this, it would be incredibly cool if Shen had a super that was usable while he was tagged out. It could heal, shield, or combo break for his ally before safely tagging in.
It's over when I say.
Thresh is a support known for disrupting enemies and pulling his allies to safety with his Soul Lantern. In League, Thresh can throw his lantern to a location, and if an ally interacts with it, they're quickly pulled to his location. Maybe Thresh could have a trait that allows him to help his teammate tag out faster and more safely through the use of his lantern. A more defensive version of Braum tagging in with Unbreakable active.
Break their ranks!
Okay, here's a really crazy one. Once upon a time, Garen had a passive in the form of the Villain system. Basically, the enemy that had killed the most allies in the past 5 minutes was marked as the villain, and Garen did much more damage to them. I think it could be kind of interesting if Garen was designed explicitly as a comeback character, making him purposefully weaker than average, but giving him some decent health and maybe even some healing similar to the Sett concept. Then, when his teammate dies, the enemy becomes marked as the villain, and Garen deals increased damage to them. On top of all this, Garen is iconic for his ultimate ability, Demacian Justice, which targets one enemy and deals damage depending on how much health they're missing. Effectively, if you're under a certain health threshold, this will kill you. It could be interesting if Garen had some kind of interaction with the enemy's health bars that allowed him to instantly down any opponent that is under a certain percentage of HP when he uses the right ender or super.
What masterpiece shall we play today?
Sona is a champion that fights with music. She plays a series of chords which do all manner of different things, such as deal damage or heal. She holds a unique position in League as an explicitly musical champion, and I think that should be shown as much as possible. DJ in Street Fighter 6 has a mechanic where some of his moves do slightly more damage if you time your button inputs to the beat of his music. Why not give Sona the same mechanic, increasing the potency of many of her strings if inputs match the rhythm of the combo perfectly? This is similar to how some strings in Tekken have just frame inputs that increase their damage.
Stage fright? Never heard of it.
Many of you probably just felt as though I left out Seraphine when discussing Sona being a musical champion. Well, I left her out because I wanted her to have her own unique mechanic. See, the thing that separates these two is that one is literally mute and takes on more of a graceful character, whereas Seraphine is a full-blown pop sensation. Mic, stage, adoring fans, all that. So I think Seraphine should carry that energy into 2x KO, and work hard into putting on a good show. When Seraphine is winning, connecting attacks with her opponent, Maybe she could start gaining fans who power her up with their cheering. As Seraphine builds a bigger and bigger audience, she reaches a point where she can choose to activate the 2x KO version of Guitar Hero's star power and augment all of her abilities for a short period. On the flip side, if her show is really bombing and she just keeps getting hit by the opponent or blocks for way too long, then she could start losing the crowd, such as the Guilty Gear Strive negative penalty mechanic, which trains your bar for being too passive.
Who wants a piece of the champ?
Jax is a weapon master so legendary that his old lore involved him being forced to use a lamppost as a weapon just to keep things fair. In-game, one of the ways they try to exemplify this is with his ability Counter-Strike. Jax enters a stance where he parries all incoming attacks before striking back for some damage. If we want to make the player really feel like they're playing a true weapon master, then why not go ahead and give Jax a Street Fighter 3 style parry that stores charges that can later be used to enhance some of his normals or specials.
This is my favorite chapter!
Yuumi is one of the most unique characters in the game by far. Her main gimmick is that she can attach herself to an ally, becoming untargetable and following their movement automatically. Her abilities then become augmented, and she basically becomes a big power-up for the ally she's attached to. Ever since 2xKO was announced, people have been jokingly wondering if Yuumi was even possible in a fighting game. And I'm unsure myself. Although I do have an idea that could get her in the game without bending over backwards trying to make her concept work. Skullgirls has a mechanic where you can choose to fight 1v2 or even 1v3 if you wish, buffing the single character to adjust for the difference in health and lack of assists. 2xKO already allows players to play with a duo or by themselves, and the logical conclusion to this path is to ditch the assist altogether and add in a fuse that's just Yuumi. She'd be there visually, but functionally it would just buff the one character to be able to 1v2. Okay, and a lightning round of the characters who are less interesting or too complicated for me to talk about in detail. Azir should be a puppet character, with Annie and Ivern having potential to be the same. Vex is just Sato from Guilty Gear. Samira is just Dante from Marvel vs. Capcom. Olaf should do more damage the lower he is. I know we already talked about Blitzcrank, but considering his whole thing is grabbing people, he would make for a good grappler. All of these characters also have the potential to be grapplers. And these could be Rushdown, Puppet, Zoners, Stance, Big Body, Install, Mid-Range, Trickster. Fiora has a parry just like Jax, but it's much more precise and, dare I say, skillful. So she could have a hard to use but very strong parry. Maybe like Jin from Tekken. Hui should have a larger move list, and all of his specials should be multiple button combo inputs such as S1, S2, or S2, S2. Jin should have a Little Mac KO punch mechanic, where he builds up charges by doing certain combo enders. Each ender gives him one charge, and every fourth charge spends them all, dealing huge damage. Cassante should be a defensive character that gains access to a new, much more offensive moveset when he's low, through some kind of install. Kha'Zix should be a total glass cannon, but in return, he deals more damage to any enemies that are isolated, which in this case would mean if their teammate is downed. Kindred could have something similar to TJ Combo's Instinct. If they have 3 bars, and an attack that would kill them connects, they briefly create a zone around them in which nobody, including the enemy, can die. The zone would then disappear after a few seconds. Rel could have 2 stances with different movesets, but to switch stances, she has to tag in with one of 2 assists. One could slam down from the top and knock up an enemy, the other could dash in quickly from the ground and interrupt incoming attacks. Shaco should be able to call in fake assists that look real, but then don't do anything. This one is mostly a joke, but give Ryze's old ultimate Desperate Power as a secret super that costs 0 bar, but is only usable when under a given health threshold, like the Raging Demon. It'll be the install of all installs, but if he isn't able to close out the game in a certain amount of time, it kills him. Alright, this is the actual, real end of the video. Shout out to the Fighting Game Glossary, which I recommend all of you use if you ever hear something that doesn't make sense to you in a fighting game context. All the definitions, all the terms, they're all there. Hope you enjoyed, and I hope that everyone watching gets into Alpha Labs.